Hi everybody, welcome to another Chats with Chaudrey. I'm delighted to be joined by Rina Dukor, who is president and co-founder of BioTools. And today we're going to be talking about her journey in science, in developing BioTools over the last 20 years as a business. And actually the challenge she faced as a woman in science, actually, because she's one of the few women at that time who were working in science and starting their own business. We're also going to be talking about chiral technology and drugs as well. So Rina, how are you?
I'm good. It's wonderful to see you, Rizwan, especially in person.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you too. In fact, the last time we saw each other in person was in March at PicCon, actually. So it seems a lifetime ago being at PicCon and the live shows like that.
It does indeed.
Yeah, well,
Different world we live
it,
in.
it has been a different world. Like now, BioTools is actually celebrating 20 years this year, which is a fantastic achievement. So congratulations. For
Thank
those
you.
people who don't know about BioTools, perhaps you could tell them a little bit about BioTools first and give them a bit of background on the business.
So, Baito, thank you. Thank you, Reason, for asking. And indeed, it seems like, the PitCon was actually the last time I traveled, and it's the longest non-travel time for me in 20 years.
I can imagine.
So it does feel a little bit different and weird, but as many other people, we have taken the time to feel and to understand what is important in both personal and work issues. So BioTools was founded 20 years ago. It's incredible that we're celebrating 20 years. And our motto is characterization experts, chirality and biologics. So we do that with very disruptive, for the lack of better word than the word that's being used too much, but disruptive technologies and services for pharmaceutical industry, academia, and government labs. So that's what we do. We do very unique instrumentation and very niche services.
Right. Okay. Now, as I said, it's 20 years old now. So perhaps you can give me a background. I mean, you started out as a scientist. How did you come up with the idea of launching BioTools in the first? So what's your background?
Okay, so I have a PhD in physical chemistry from
Right.
University of Illinois at Chicago. I studied under Professor Timothy Keiderling, and we studied technology called vibrational circular dichroism. It's
Right.
short, VCD is a short notation for it. And when I went to industry, to Amoco as a postdoc. And when I got there, there was no sort of spectroscopic techniques. We were doing proteins, DNA, all kinds of biological molecules, and I really wanted to buy VCD. And coincidentally, at about the same time, chemical and engineering news were on the cover, were doing stories almost annually on the development of chiral drugs.
Right.
And so when I started reading those articles, I immediately realized that, wow, the technology I used in my PhD thesis or in my PhD study for biological molecules would be exceptional for the use of chiral drugs. And so I immediately decided that I have to commercialize VCD. I contacted Professor Nafee, who was a competing group from us, Lawrence Nafee at Syracuse. And he also thought it would be phenomenal if we could commercialize VCD. So we decided to be partners, and the rest is 20-year history.
Wow.
So that was really, CNN really opened my eyes to small molecule pharmaceuticals, because I did not know anything about that. I was really a biological person.
Right. Well,
So,
as a woman in pharma, though, I mean, obviously, I know, having worked in pharma now for the last 4 or 5 years, uh, women in science has become a huge topic. And inclusion and diversity within the workplace. Now, obviously, being a woman 20 years ago in pharma, there was even fewer women in the commercial side, if you like, or commercialization side of pharma. So how was it then, in terms when you were starting up, in terms of other women in the sector, and what challenges did you face?
so I'll start with my walking in as a PhD into Amoco Biotech. It was a biotech division of Amoco. I was the only other woman PhD as I started my postdoctoral, industrial postdoc. And honestly, I was shocked, because in graduate school and graduate studies, we have a lot of women. Given that most women were in organic chemistry and biochemistry and not so many in physical chemistry, I was still quite surprised that I was really pretty much the only woman. The other woman left shortly after I started. So for a few years, I was the only woman. We started hiring later on in brought some other women there, but for a while. And so when I started my business, I did not know any other women, either entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in spectroscopy or analytical sciences. I do know that there were two others now. I still only know one personally. I've met her twice, but I know another woman. And I will tell you, Razin, the biggest challenge, I think, I'm very outgoing person, as you know me. And for a while, I didn't even realize I was the only woman.
Right.
But as we entered the meetings, I found myself not being able to speak the language sometimes. So for the icebreaker, so, when people heard me say this many times, when you start the meeting, there's donuts, bagels, coffee, and all the men are talking about the sports as an example,
Right.
what team won the day before or the night before.
Right.
And so I made it my point to learn whatever city I was in, whatever country I was in, I had to know so that I could be part of the conversation. And some women will tell me, well, you adapted to men. In a way I did, because I wanted to be part of the conversation, but I also continued to wear colorful suits, jewelry, makeup, and I was always a part of the conversation. I always made sure that I was the attention and that they need to listen to me.
Yeah.
And so that really opened up my eyes. And I'm very big, one of my biggest passions is women in sciences and supporting young women, and not just entrepreneurship, but really immigrant women. Because I was an immigrant myself. I was
Sure.
born in the old Soviet Union. And as I go to most of our conferences like FACS and PitCon, American Chemical Society, and biological, a lot of meetings, there's a lot of immigrant women these days in sciences. And I find that they are less outspoken. They're afraid to become part of the circle. And I try my best to draw them in. And the other thing that really works is to educate the men, because they all have wives, they all have daughters, nieces. So they want the women to be included, but they don't always know that it's an issue. They really don't. They just go about, especially scientists, they have one track mind. They know what they
Right.
need to
Sure.
do. And opening up their eyes and pointing out to why women do not sit down and, at the table, as it's being said, or why women don't speak up, or why women don't bring the issues to the table. It's very important. Very, very important. We had a session last year at the SciEx meeting in whatever it was, a SciEx meeting, seems like ages ago. I can't even remember where it was now. But anyway, we had a fantastic panel of women, from recent graduate to a very advanced director from Procter & Gamble, Diane Perry. But what really struck me is how many men came to our session, and how many men were able to answer the questions and listen in terms of the promoting women in pharmaceutical industry, and working with them as graduate students and postdocs. So it's an important conversation to have.
And how do you think, from your perspective, what changes have you seen over the last 20 years or so in business in relation to women in science?
I think definitely women have risen up to many, many management positions. I personally have seen a lot of the women that I started working with 20 years ago as young scientists have now become directors in pharmaceutical industry. They lead groups, even VPs. I know several women who have risen up. There is many more CEOs now, not enough, but we will get there. So I think the opportunities are there. I think from my perspective, what I see on the ground level, sometimes it's not even the men that don't let you get to the ceiling. Sometimes the women are shy enough to step away. We do have more responsibilities at home. We really do, no matter what is being said. Like, I have really good friends, and she has become a CEO of technology company, and her husband helped with children. So when you have a very supporting spouse, a husband or a significant other, whoever it is, if you have that support, then you can rise. If you don't have a support, it's going to be extremely difficult. So I always tell women that I mentor that it's absolutely critical not just to drive yourself and push yourself to be involved, to take the challenge and to step up yourself, but find the partner that will help you do that. Not, it has to be equal partner. And I think that's where it starts. The partnership must be equal. You can't just be the one doing the cleaning, the children, the cooking, and all of that. You have to have somebody who will take exactly the same equity in the household, so you can help with, you can get to your career step and do that.
Right. And what about in terms of culture? I mean, you've had your own business as for 20 years. How have you developed the culture of that business?
Oh, great question. So yes, it starts at home. It starts with me, and I prefer to hire women for the positions, for as many positions as I can. Scientific position, accounting positions, support positions. I've had many women scientists, managerial positions as well. Obviously, I would hire a great man if they're, I don't discriminate based on science, but I try. Some people even accuse me for trying to go too much to hire women who need support, who haven't had a job before, or who need an internship. We bring a lot of interns. BioTools is known here in Florida as one of the top internship locations, and we bring men and women, but I do try to bring as many women as I can, like I said, especially if they're from the immigrant families, so that they have an opportunity to see, not just to be in science, and not just to see if they want to do science or business of science, so to speak, but to see examples of what women can achieve. I like to show that not just with myself. I had many other women here who serve as great examples of that.
Right. Okay. And
We started at home.
sure. And looking back over the last 20 years, so if you look at the business as a whole, putting aside the fact about being women, what were the biggest challenges you think you faced in sort of developing the business overall?
That's an excellent question. So when I started the business, I dived into it just as with the passion, almost without knowledge. I had scientific knowledge. I now had Professor Nafi, who knew obviously a lot about VCD, experimental and theoretical issues. We had a fantastic partner in a small company known as BOMAM in Quebec, Canada. They're an FTIR company. It's now ABB. So they were a fantastic partner, and I owe them tremendous amount of gratitude for helping us out. But I did not know at the time at all. I came out of PhD science. I had no idea that somebody could go and raise money to help with commercialization and marketing effort and bringing it to the market. To me, as an immigrant and doing everything and achieving everything on my own, I came to America when I was 15, and I literally worked 3 jobs almost from day one. When I went to undergraduate, I worked. Graduate school, I supplemented the income as much as I could. So I've always worked, and I could not imagine that you could ask somebody for money for your business. When somebody told me that, I could not imagine that somebody would give me money, me, the little Rina wanting to do VCD. How can somebody do that? And I had a fantastic, business plan that I presented to the president and president of BOMAM, Gary Whale at the time. And he took a chance on me. And so Gary Whale and Harry Bayesh from BOMAM, they took a chance on myself and Larry Nafi, but I did not know. And I think that was my biggest, people say it's good and bad to take investors, but I think if I at least would have known that was a possibility, we would have gotten to market much faster. So that the challenge of how do you get a very sophisticated capital equipment instrument that costs over $150,000, how do you get the parts? How do you do all of that? And so that was a challenge from the beginning. And I think our challenges as we grew, as we got to the market, as we expanded the product portfolio, the challenges obviously changed. And our biggest challenge right now, and we didn't realize that until I would say maybe 5 years ago, is that we pushed it to pharmaceutical industry, but it's a brand new technology. It's not making a better mousetrap. It's not making a smaller Raman instrument, with all due respect to everybody who did. It was phenomenal. But Raman existed for 70 years before that. 75 years. It's not it's not a better instrument. It's a completely brand new technology, completely a brand new way of looking at chiral molecules. So, and we were against the gold standard of X-ray crystallography. So how do you do that without funding and without support and without mentorship and without just capital? How do you build that? So that was the original challenge. And what we've learned is that because we went directly to pharmaceutical industry, our first supporters were fantastic scientists in the pharmaceutical industry. What we learned is that students in graduate schools have never heard of it because it's not a technique that's being taught in either undergraduate or graduate level.
Right.
So young scientists are now coming 20 years later and they say, VCD, what? It's a virtual, it's a video disc. What are you talking about? And, you know, I've had one company here, they came to BioTools and they said, Rina, your biggest challenge is that this technique must be taught. And so we have a campaign called Teach VCD. We're trying to encourage as many academics as possible because VCD really teaches, you know, vibrational spectroscopy, quantum chemistry, chirality, and so on. So that's a challenge, but it's a little different challenge than the business challenge. It's really a scientific challenge.
Right. So what advice, one piece of advice would you give to anybody now starting up their own business within the science field?
$1 million question. You know, I watch now and listen to a lot of different podcasts from a lot of very famous and known business people. And the first advice everyone gives is just start. Just you have an idea, just start. And that is true. But in science, it's a little different. You have to deeply understand what other techniques you're competing with, unless you're making molecules. Like, so I separate from people who make fantastic medicines or, you know, making some kind of diagnostic kits or not diagnostic, but a molecule is different than a tool.
Sure.
And so if you're making a tool, you really have to understand what other tools are on the market.
Yep.
And it's critical to do your due diligence on that. Absolutely critical, because there are so many techniques on the market now. There are a lot of tools, and scientists solve problems all the time, right? Even people say, well, how did they do chirality or absolute configuration before you came along or before VCD? Yes, they did. They did absolute configuration with crystallography. They had to grow crystal. So you have to understand why your technique or why your tool is better than the other tool. So doing your due diligence on science is absolutely critical, because pharma especially is very difficult. It's very difficult for pharma to adapt new technology.
Right.
Yes, they all have innovation groups, but the reality of it is the scientists themselves, unless it's driven by a single scientist or a group of scientists, they know what they know, right? They've learned NMR, they've learned mass spec, they've learned chromatography, they've learned X-ray in graduate school, and that's what they're going to use. Why would they want to use a brand new technique unless they were really a curious person?
Sure.
So if you have a scientific curiosity, you can do that. So back to your question, I think the first thing you do is you do scientific due diligence. The second thing you do is if it's a tool, you have to figure out where your money is going to come from. Either it's going to be an SBIR, STTR grant, or if it's going to be an investor, or if it's going to be friends and family, or if it's going to be a bigger company that notices you and says, okay, this technology might be useful for us. We will, be a minor investor.
Yeah.
So that's important. That was one of our mistakes. As I said before, I didn't appreciate that part of business. And I would strongly recommend. And the third and most important is you surround yourselves with the people you trust, people who understand and know the technology and know you and how you work, and people who would work hard and will be honest.
Fine.
I
Brilliant.
was, early on, I got this award and I was flown to Washington, D.C. And I was sitting at the table with entrepreneurs, and this woman told me, I'm going to give you one advice. And I said, what is it? And she said, it's not who you hire, it's who you fire that's going to be the most critical aspect of your business. And I thought she was like, it seemed like an odd advice to me at the time, but it is hard to fire. Like, as a mother, as a woman, that was a challenge for me, to be harsh and to say, okay, you no longer have this job.
Yeah.
And so you take time to hire the right people.
Sure,
Is the third advice.
Yeah, well, that's good advice. So let's talk about chiral technology now. So,
My favorite topic.
so let's talk about. So, what changes have you seen in the last 20 years, and why is it still relevant?
Okay, so chirality is, okay, that's a great question as well. So I said 20 years ago, Chemical and Engineering News was publishing chiral drugs on every, once a year, an issue dedicated to that, and they no longer do that. But the reality of it is more and more drugs, as we started in pharma, I would say back 20 years ago, maybe 40% of new drugs were chiral. So for those of you who don't know, chirality means not superimposable mirror images. And a typical drug that's best known is like Lipitor or Plavix. A lot of you might have heard of a drug called thalidomide that it racemizes or changes to both forms in your body, and it created issues for women back in the 60s. And that's how, one of the reasons FDA started issuing guidance on drugs, and especially chirality. So back then, when we started, I would say 40 to 50% of all drugs, small molecule drugs, were chiral. As we went along, I would say now would probably be about 80%. If you look at all small molecule drugs approved by FDA in 2018, I think it was 90 or 85% of all small molecule drugs were chiral. Also, a lot of pesticides, herbicides are chiral. Fragrances and flavors are chiral. And a lot of people don't realize this, but in not pharmaceutical, but other industries of pharmaceutical, then we have environmental and also cannabis industry. Most cannabinoids are chiral. And you see people getting sick. It's because they're making synthetic cannabinoids potentially as of the label, and they might not be the right chirality, or they might not be the right molecule completely. So, and in this world, in the pandemic world, most antivirals are chiral. There's over 100 antiviral drugs on the market, and I would say there's like over 100 of them. So Tamiflu is chiral, Relenza is chiral because of the way they bind. Chirality has its shape, and so the way they bind to their receptor is very important. So chirality is here to stay.
Right, and so what do you see the future for chiral technology then? How do you see it developing over the next few years?
I think, the chiral chromatography is a very well-established field. I think there is a lot of every company does chiral chromatography to separate. There's a lot of enzymatic reactions that are asymmetric. So they start with they start with molecule, and then they make a pure chiral molecule by the end of it. So all of that, I think, is fairly established. There are lots of groups around the world working on catalysis and asymmetric reactions. I think for us, in terms of VCD, I think it will only grow because the number of chiral molecules is growing. It's not, like I just said, it's not just pharmaceutical. Our world is chiral. Everything we see, if you think about 4 biological building blocks of life, amino acids, proteins, lipids, nucleic acid, and sugars, they're all chiral. So carbohydrate drugs and nucleic acid based drugs also involve chirality. And so our technology, both for small molecules and for biologics, which maybe we can talk about next time or
Sure.
someday, the biologics also has chirality in it. And so that's all very important as well. I don't think our world, because our world is chiral, because we have all chiral molecules inside us, our receptors are chiral. I think chirality is not going anywhere. I think it's only going to grow, and with that the tools for chiral structure characterization, including VCD.
Right. And so finally, because we've talked about obviously your journey and chiral technology, but in terms of BioTools, what solutions do you offer which are unique then within this area?
Okay, thank you for asking that. So we are both an instrumentation company and a services company for
Right.
those who cannot afford their own instruments. So our featured instrument is known as the Chiral IR. We have so it's the instrument that we first incorporated or made back 20 years ago. It allows scientists to determine if you have the left or right-handed molecule. So it's still probably our best seller in terms of the instrumentation. Our goal is to get it to every single university in the world. That's,
Right.
I think, the market. It's not just every pharmaceutical company and every environmental, fragrances, but I think if we could get it for teaching into universities and colleges, that's my goal, that's my passion, that's what I want to see. We also offer an instrument for looking at biological molecules, which is a sister technique called Raman optical activity. So I know you know Raman well, and so it's a same combination. It's an optical activity to the Raman, and it's fantastic for vaccine, carbohydrates, vaccines, nucleic acid based vaccines, or carbohydrate or protein based, and because we can measure proteins and DNAs. So it's a phenomenal technique. We've actually got an R&D 100 award for that. I'd like to see it also in universities as much as possible, in pharma. And then we offer services. So we do all of this for pharmaceutical industry, and we do that for academics. I mean, we had just a couple of recent cases where a professor or scientist would reach us and say, I submitted a paper and the reviewer came back and said, why don't you do VCD for absolute configuration? So we love helping professors. We love helping students. They spend 4 years synthesizing a molecule, and then they don't know which one they synthesized, and we don't want them to spend another 4 years crystallizing and trying to determine. So, the services is a really big component for us, but the instruments is our heart.
Fantastic. Well, look, I know that's all we've got time for, but that was really interesting. Thank you for taking time to talk about your history and the challenges you faced. I think people will find that very interesting and useful. As you quite rightly mentioned, obviously we will have another, hopefully, conversation about the biologic side of the business and that technology, perhaps at a later Chats with Chaudhry. But for now, if people want to know more information, where can they get more information about chiral technology?
So our website is biotools.us, biotools one word.us. We do have information on chirality or chiral technologies there. Obviously, you can Google more about FDA has a guidance, USDA, EPA, European, they all have guidance on chirality, so you can learn more about that. And please feel free to link me in or email me at rkdukor@biotools.us. I'm always thrilled to hear from customers and would be happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. All right. Well, look, Rina, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that. And so actually taking the time out on Labor Day to have this interview, you could have been standing yourself on the beach in Miami rather than doing this. Well, there you go. So on South Beach. But thank you for taking the time out to do that. And I hope everybody found that useful. As Rina quite rightly said, there is going to be a link above the video so you can go to the website and find out more. They've got lots of information on chiral technology there. As Rina also said, if you've got any questions for her, or whether it's about the technology or actually her experiences as a woman in science, I'm sure she'll be more than happy to give you advice or give you her feedback on any things that you might want to talk about. Then by all means get in touch with her directly or leave a comment below the video, and I'm sure she'll be happy to answer that. So all that's definitely say thank you very much, Rina, for your time. It was really lovely to see you again.
Me too. And you stay well, my friend. Stay well,
You
everybody. Thank
too.
you for taking this opportunity. Love talking to you.
Love talking to you as well. And as always, to everybody else, uh, enjoy whatever you're doing today and for the rest of the week and for the rest of the year. And as always, stay well and stay safe. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Bye bye.